And I remember people's reaction to System early on. It was kind of like, what the fuck is that? Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't like, oh, that's interesting music. Oh, I like that. No, no, it was more like, what the fuck is that?
How are you?
Good, brother. How are you?
It's good. Nice to talk to you again, man.
Nice to see you again. Yeah, nice to talk to you again. Thank you for having me on.
Congrats on the book. I guess I want to start with why now for the book?
Good question. I got approached by an agent in London, my friend Max now, and he hit me up, and I think he had seen the film Truth to Power that you and I spoke about a couple of years back, and he said, "Look, I would love to represent you and do a memoir." And at the time, I was like, "I'm not sure I want to do a memoir, you know, but I'm interested in another book." He goes, "What kind of book?" And I go, "Philosophy book." About the intersection of justice and spirituality. And he's like, who's going to read that? You know, like, we had this laugh. And then he's like, well, you could do it all. You know, you can have the philosophy within the story, within your, life story, etc. And I go, that's interesting. So I approached it in a way that I wasn't just telling the story as a memoir, but also trying to figure out what lessons that there are to learn here philosophically for myself and hopefully others as well, throughout. And that became kind of like the looking for that key, here and there. So it became a fun project in that way. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you do, which is similar to I don't know if you read Geddy Lee's book.
Yes, I've actually been listening to his audiobook recently.
Geddy Lee says in his book, essentially, in order for you to understand me, in order for you to understand Rush, you need to be able to understand my family, and you need to be able to understand the Holocaust. You need to be able to understand what my father and my mother went through. And it actually just occurred to me that is similar to how you start your book too.
Absolutely, yeah. And I didn't know at the time, but I've just recently been listening to his audiobook and going through his parents' story and their survival from the camps and all of that stuff. And it is such a strong story, strong, it really helps you understand who this person is beyond the music and why they even gravitated to music. It all plays a part, right? So yeah, it's a strong book.
In your case, with the story of your grandfather. Now, before we sort of talk about what your grandfather went through, Stepan, right? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Stepan. He. I wonder if you could tell me from like a child's perspective what you remember about him, and like what do you remember about him meaning to you?
He was a very doting grandfather. He'd make us like cheese and bologna sandwiches in the morning, but he'd make them like a hill, like he'd put like 12, 13 pieces of toast, and with bologna and stuff. He would take us to like, buy us little toys, and he was just very loving and laughing all the time. Like, he was a very positive guy for someone who had such a hard life, Um, I believe that people that have gone through that type of trauma, be it a Holocaust, genocide, etc., they've already died once. So they have a second life, and they live their second life completely differently. Obviously very grateful and strong. And you see a lot of people, I mean, I'm getting off topic,
No,
but
please.
you see a lot of people living up to their 90s, hundreds that are, Holocaust survivors, genocide survivors, which is very rare because they must have this zest to live, based on the trauma that they've experienced.
How was the experience for you of writing the story of your family, like putting paper to pen, fingers to keyboard, and writing the experience of your family in the Armenian Genocide?
It was the ultimate research project. It was like there were things I didn't know even about my parents who, are still alive. And, like the moment they met, for example, neither my brother nor I had ever asked them, hey, when is the first time you guys actually met? And I don't know why we've never asked that or why they've never told us that. But that, just to figure that out was worth writing the book. I mean, I think early on, as I was writing, I realized that there are many rock star stories that you could tell for sensationalism, and fun stories that you can tell. And, I wanted to tell some of them, but there was no, these are the real stories of who I am, not things I experienced on the road and touring and stuff like that. Those are fine. But, it's more important to kind of establish where I came from, what my people came from, what makes me tick, right? I mean, that's a memoir for me. And like Getty Lee's, like you said. So that's why we started the chapter with, first we do the intro, and then the first chapter is literally about my grandfather, my grandparents, and where they came from, because that's where my people come from.
Are you aware of the atrocity your entire life? Or is there, like, at 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, the penny drops and you sort of understand it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tom. I think I became aware of it pretty young. I don't know what age it was, but it was, it was taught, because that was their family. I mean, if you have a grandparent and you're sitting with them and you just turn around and go, how was your brother? Did you have brothers? And any question you ask them about their family, the genocide is going to come in as part of the story, that you can't not tell that story. So yeah, they died pretty young. What did they die from? Oh, well, the genocide, right? Like, so so it became a thing that, as an Armenian, you learn about this at a very young age, because it's not just your national story, it's your family story, right? As a kid, you want to know your family story. Family tree, for example. I was given the task at school of doing the family tree. Well, guess what? Mine got cut off. I knew about 3 levels, and then it was like nobody knows, asking aunts and uncles. That's really sad, like people of European descent that grew up in America, they could pretty much put up a family tree if they do the right research, especially today with genetics and all of that. But we can't, and it is traumatic. And once you learn this story of, this trauma, this national trauma, you can never leave it behind. It's a part of you, you know, especially because, unlike the Holocaust, where you had the trials thereafter, the Nuremberg trials, and at least there was some form of justice, whatever you want to call that. The Armenian Genocide didn't have that. And until today, modern Republic of Turkey still denies the Armenian Genocide, which is adding, insult to injury after 100 years.
When does it become your life's mission, or your art's mission, or your spirit's mission to talk about it, to let people know about it? Because that's not everybody's reaction. That's not everybody's mission, and understandably so.
Sure. I mean, my problem, it's like, personally, I've learned the lessons from my family and from my people's history. But unfortunately, it's repeating itself, as we know. There's Holocaust and genocide happening now, right? I mean, just in September of last year, Azerbaijan attacked 120,000 Armenians in an enclave known as Nagorno-Karabakh, where those people have been living for multiple millennia, right? Historical Armenian lands. After starving them for 9 months with an economic blockade and medical blockade, not allowing any food to come in, those people were starving, they attacked them. And those people are now refugees within Armenia, Russia, elsewhere. And who's talking about that? Who's talking about that genocide, that ethnic cleansing? Who's talking, I mean, we're seeing horrible trauma happening in Gaza, horrible trauma happening in Israel, both sides, right? You've got Hamas, a terrorist organization that has committed the ultimate crime, as far as I'm concerned, right? Raping, pillaging, killing, that's genocide. Those people were killed because of who they were, what race they were, what people they were, what religion they had. Netanyahu government, what they're doing is no less horrible, to be honest, And we're seeing this as a world community in front of our eyes, thinking we're progressing, but we're regressing. We haven't learned the lessons from the genocide of the first, 20th century.
There are people who process these things very personally, and again, I don't, and spiritually, you, throughout this book, one thing that comes through, you want to talk about a book about philosophy, it becomes very clear that it's a mission of yours. In addition to it being, like you said, this trauma being imbued in your DNA, imbued in your art, but the mission is imbued in you as well. What's the earliest memory of you thinking like, I got it? I mean, the earliest system shows you were talking about in on like the Sunset Strip, you were putting up white sheets of paper like a mattress cover or something like that that said 1915, millions died, Armenian Genocide. What's the earliest memory you have of saying, I want to be someone to change things? I want to be someone to be a history keeper?
Interesting. I probably in my young teens, I became an activist because of the hypocrisy of the kind of taboo nature of genocide within the United States, not properly recognizing it. And it made me an activist because I thought to myself, geez, if this is something that we know historically to be true, and a democracy like the US is not properly recognizing it, how many other truths are we not recognizing because of economic, political expediency, whatever? And that made me an activist in my early teens. I want to say maybe like 14, 15, probably. And I ended up joining an Armenian youth group called the AOF, and that even politicized me more. So I was really an activist long before becoming a musician or an artist. And so it kind of just worked its way into what I did. And sometimes, as you've read in the book, it worked against me and against the band, and created tension within the band sometimes because I'm more of that, an activist than most of the other guys are. Although regarding the Armenian Genocide, because it's all of our family's history, that's something that we all always talked about and, tried to make people aware of. And it's I consider that one of System of a Down's most compelling and top accomplishments, actually, that awareness campaign.
It's very clear, and embarrassingly on my part, it was how I found out. I mean, as a young man in Canada,
that's the biggest honor for us to hear, to be honest. Like that's amazing. That there's this huge catastrophe, this huge humanitarian catastrophe of 1.5 million people slaughtered, and most people around the world didn't know it until a rock band introduced them to it. It's almost funny, But when, that's the problem with power. Power only represents things that power is interested in. And, I'm not talking about your last name, obviously. But, that's why we have to be aware as populace, especially within democracies where we do have, agency.
I want to talk a little bit about music. So your family's living in Lebanon. What music were you listening to in like Beirut in the 70s?
My dad played a lot of Armenian music. We heard Arabic music, obviously, because we were in Lebanon. French music, because Lebanon was a French colony. European music, Italian music. So, that was really not a lot of rock, not a lot of, British music or anything like that. It was just a lot of ethnic music, I guess, at the time growing up. And when I came to Hollywood in 1975, when we immigrated to Los Angeles with the family, man, it was like musical cultural shock, right? Like not just physical cultural shock, but the music was so different. It was the mid 70s, disco and soul music, and like, just incredible bands like, Horns and, Earth, Wind and Fire and Michael Jackson and, like, Marvin Gaye, and just hearing all this incredible music was just like mind blowing.
Did you like any of it? Like the sense I get from reading the book is that like heavy music. I mean, I want to talk about Iron Maiden in a second, but like, were you like one of these kids that was just passionate about it? Were you just the average kid who liked music?
I liked music, but I was average. I wasn't necessarily an audiophile in my young age, at least. And I was definitely not a metalhead growing up or a heavy rock fan. But my brother was. So he would play it in the house, and I would get introduced to, whether it's Slayer or Iron Maiden or Metallica, through him, and I'd hear it. But my musical upbringing was different. It was very much world music and jazz music and pop and all sorts of stuff, really. In my musical progression, something interesting happened. When I became obsessed with music, finally, I became someone who binged and purged music. So for 3 months, I would only listen to one type of music, hip hop for 3 months, the best of, right? 3 months, death metal, the best of, 3 months, I don't know, reggae, 3 months of this, and I would just like, I just became like, I almost imbibed all these different musical selections into my consciousness. And that became my musical kind of depth after a while as a musician.
In the book, I love a life-changing moment. And in the book, you talk about going to this Iron Maiden show that
Yeah.
changed your life. How did that change your life?
Well, that was my first rock concert ever. And my girlfriend was really into Iron Maiden at the time. I must have been 16 or 17, and she was like a year younger. And we both went to the same school in Hollywood, and she got tickets and took me to an Iron Maiden concert. I had never heard Iron Maiden. So imagine going to an Iron Maiden concert, never have heard Iron Maiden or heavy music for that matter at the time, because I didn't really listen to heavy music at the time. So it was just like mind blowing, because if you play someone that type of music, especially Iron Maiden, right? It's like wow. So my senses were totally overwhelmed. I think it's the first time I had smelled pot. We were very kind of, we're like, what is that? you know, um, but it was amazing. And years later, of course, she's like, oh yeah, now you're the rocks, you're the metal guy. Like, you didn't even listen to this stuff at the time. I took you there. I dragged you there, that kind of a thing. So it was interesting that became and years later, getting to meet Bruce, and the guys from Iron Maiden and touring with them. And I never told them this, but they were my first band, that I ever saw, which was incredible.
Was it the spectacle? Was it I know it was the music, but was it the spectacle? Were you sitting in there watching them on stage and going, I love the show, and like, I kind of want to be that dude?
I didn't at the time. I did like the music, but I didn't ever think that I could be that guy at the time. This is when I was 16, 17. Music hadn't crossed my mind as a career choice. I wasn't playing music at the time. Music came to me late as a love affair. It came to me when I was like, yeah, I started playing music like on a little Casio keyboard when I was 19, while I was going to university, studying business of all things. And I just became, it was a meditative thing for me, because when I played music, I stopped thinking, right? And it was the only thing that stopped my incessant mind. And there was a lot of negativity going on. My parents were going through this horrible lawsuit, and just things were, all the walls were crumbling, let's say, right? And music was the only thing that was able to kind of get me away from that, just playing that keyboard and, trying to figure something out. And it's not until years later in my 20s that I actually admitted to myself that music was my calling, my vision. And when I did, it became this great epiphany, and my whole life pivoted, and everything I did was to work toward that goal at that point, became a lifer in that sense. But when I was 16, 17, I had no idea. I was listening to this band going, wow, this is raucous. This is crazy.
When did you realize, or like, what made the relationship? You talk about getting to know, working with Darren when you start System. It was magic. You refer to it as magic in the book. What was so special about it, looking back now?
I remember the first time we sat down together. It was in a rehearsal studio that we were sharing. He was playing guitars for a band, and I was playing keyboards in another band. So we were just friends because we shared rehearsal space, and it was a large group of friends, two bands. And so I remember him sitting down, and he started playing something on an acoustic guitar or whatever on guitar, but not plugged in and he started singing something, and I started singing with him, and we immediately noticed that our two voices had this really incredible harmonic resonance together, that it was a unique combination of sounds. And what I remember appreciating about him was he was like so serious about music. He was like 16, I think, at the time, and like, because the rest of the bands, they like to party, they like living the musician's lifestyle, really. But none of them, I could probably say none of them ended up in music, ultimately, but I saw that seriousness in him and I liked it. I was serious as well at that point, and so we got along and we started collaborating on music, playing each other music. Like a lot of it is like, oh, have you heard Tom Waits? No, let's listen to him, that kind of thing. And, just, kind of really feeling vibes and then starting to play together slowly, sing together, that kind of thing. But it's our voices, the way that our voices, are completely different, but harmonize so well with each other that we notice, wow, this is pretty amazing. Like it's unique,
Let me play some of the early System of a Down. Take a listen to this.
I'm not there all the time, Some people call it in tea. Yeah, they call it in tea. I play Russian roulette every day, a man's sport with the bullet called live. Yeah, mama called.
Sugar by System of a Down. It's fun to go back and listen to some of this music for this interview. What do you hear when you hear that?
Wow. We've performed that song probably a million times.
But when do you get to hear? When do you get to hear it back, Serj?
Yeah. It's just what I remember is, so Sugar was technically our first single off our first record.
Yeah.
And when I say single, it wasn't like the radio was playing it all over the place, all over the world, or anything like that. There was a local station in Los Angeles that was playing it at nights, once in a while. There was a DJ called Jed the Fish that on a specialty show. That would play it on K-Rock. And I remember hearing it. And that's the first time I've ever heard one of our songs on the radio, which was like, mind blowing. Like people outside the room recorded and are actually listening to it. Like it was just like, wow, so it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the video we made for it, which I'm really proud of, which was kind of the intro was taken from the film Network, where the TV host kind of goes crazy after he's announcing all these news and stuff like that.
I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. I remember writing that part actually, that intro, and making the video, and it's just, and I remember people's reaction to System early on. It was kind of like, what the fuck is that? Like, it wasn't like, oh, that's interesting music. Oh, I like that. No, it was more like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And to have success, commercial success with what the fuck is that is kind of mind blowing to me, because none of us ever even thought about that,
Okay. I have a hard question about that then. So but in order to ask that, I want to play this.
Yo, what are you on the wall? How do you on disorder? No, somewhere between the sacred silence and sleep. Somewhere between the sacred silence and sleep.
That is Toxicity. That's System of a Down, which, by the way, is a waltz in the chorus, like rundakta, undakta, undakta, undakta. Yeah. And then has that. Anyway, I could go on about that song forever. But you said something interesting there that comes up in the book a lot. There was no expectation for mainstream success. There was no expectation for radio success, because your music sounded so different. It was jazzy, Armenian folk music, metal, screaming. Like there was no way it was going to take off. And then all of a sudden it does. All of a sudden Chop Suey does. All of a sudden Toxicity does. Looking back, have you come to any sense as to why all of a sudden it started working? What it was about this music that allowed it to reach so many people? It's a big question to ask that typically the person who makes the music can't answer. It's usually the job of the critics, but I wonder if you have some perspective on it.
I remember Kevin Weatherly, who was the program director at K-Rock, a year before we took our band took off. He had played him one of our songs, and he said, "I find the band incredibly interesting, but there's no way we can ever play this on the radio." And a year later, we were the top band on that station.
Yeah.
Part of it is, we did our work in terms of building an audience ground up touring, opening for Slayer, you know, playing Ozfest. We were on the road for that first 2-3 years, like pretty much the whole time. So we were in a radio band trying to make it at the radio. We were winning fans over every night by performing. So that was a part of it, obviously. But part of it is also luck. You know, the movement of music, especially on the radio, transferred over from Seattle to LA. So it became from grunge. Suddenly you started hearing Korn and Deftones on the radio and new metal and all of this type of stuff. A community that we had fit in because we were in Los Angeles and we had started playing with, you know, as an opener to, you know, bands like those, you know. So in a way, we got lucky because the radio format changed as we came up. So timing was essence here as well, you know. So that's very interesting, and that's something you can't predict. You just do what you do and then hope for the best, right?
I love an honest answer to that question, which is more and more musicians. I mean, Bruce Springsteen kind of answered the question like that when I asked him. He said, "You know, man, you prepare and you work and you build an audience, but a lot of it's just luck. It's just luck."
Sure, yeah. I mean, for him to say that, that's amazing too. That's incredible.
I told him I agreed with him. Let me play one more System track. Take a listen to this.
Sweet berries ready for you, ghosts are no different than you. Ghosts are now waiting for you. Are you dreaming the night?
From their 2005 record Mesmerize, the System of a Down with the song Question. This part of the book was really interesting to me, Serj, because you and I have spoken before, and we've spoken a little bit about the intersection of your activism. We've spoken about the history of the Armenian Genocide. We've spoken a little bit about how it's informed your music and your art, the things we've talked about up until this point. But I was really interested, maybe that's the word I'll use, to read. You talk about sort of the later years of the band as you know, me and other fans have wondered what happened. And you talk really honestly in this book about how your relationship changed with Darren, your main collaborator in the band. You know, you wanted more creative quality in the band you talk about. Darren's songs seemed to get a little bit more work on them. I have a question, sort of the causal question around that. But first, I want to ask you, what had changed in your dynamic that this relationship had changed if it hadn't always been this way?
What changed in the dynamic is basically years of time and you know, the progression of the band, the success of the band, everything that happened in between the day that we met and now, basically, you know, so 25, 30 years, you know, a lot changes in that time, you know, you know, and so I think that's a part of it. I think, you know, Darren's always, like I said earlier, he's been a lifer and he's incredibly serious about his music. And he's incredibly protective of his music and vulnerable due to his music. You know, all of those things kind of go together. So it's those things, I think, that created some of the, you know, creative differences that we started finding. And it's also our progression. Listen, when Darren and I started working together, I didn't really write a lot of instrumental music. You know, I mostly wrote lyrics. I was the lyricist. I was the singer. And he didn't write any lyrics. He just wrote music, you know. But as time progressed and I played more musical instruments and I started becoming a songwriter, composer, and he started writing more lyrics, it kind of, you know, we started kind of covering each other's territory. And I was okay with that, because if he wrote lyrics, I was trying to encourage him to write more. Because I believe in artistic growth. I believe in progression. I don't believe in things staying the same way, because for music's sake, you know, otherwise the music becomes the same thing over and over again. That progression is necessary in every artist's life or in every group's life. So I was very encouraging of that. And I just wish that I got some of that back, right? And so that wasn't the case. And it was disappointing, and it became a creative difference over the band's path and whatnot over time. Yeah.
Why did you want to write about this in the book?
A lot of it has been publicized in a very sensationalist format by media, music media mostly. And I kind of wanted it to put it in a proper perspective and grounding perspective, but with love and with balance and understanding that these things happen. This is normal. You have a relationship, and you have differences in opinion as how you want to go forward, whether it's a band or a marriage or whatever it is. And these things happen. And so I wanted to take that aspect out. I wanted to take the sensationalist aspect out of the whole thing and be like, this is not only what happened, but this is how I see things, that kind of.
In the spirit of asking something with love and compassion, I want to preface this next question with that. I see you smiling at me. I appreciate it. Because this is a conversation I have with a lot of artists whose bands have stopped playing together. No, sorry, your band has not stopped playing together. You just announced a big gig in the next little while.
Right.
But
yeah, we have 2 shows this year.
Yeah, you haven't been making new records.
We haven't been making new music. We only put out 2 songs when the invasion of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, happened in 2020 by Azerbaijan, because we felt like the Azeri trolls, the government-sponsored trolls, were taking over social media and the news networks, and Armenia, the victims of these attacks, weren't getting the word out. So we became kind of like obsessed with getting the word out, because we were seeing our people suffer. So we put out those 2 songs because of that, and we donated a lot of the proceeds for that to the cause as well.
How do you balance the love and obligation you might feel towards your fans, those who love System, and the internal struggles within the band? Do you know what I mean by that?
Totally. And that's an incredibly smart question. It's really hard catering when you're an artist. It's really hard catering. If you're an entertainer, catering is in your,
the bands like System of a Down records, I want to give them System of a Down records.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if you're an artist, then you're just creating what comes to you. You're almost unaware of what people want. Like, yes, if it's something heavier, people are going to like it more, But if you're a good songwriter, you could do both. I do orchestral music, I do film music, I do rock music, I do
piano-based ballad music. It's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, so I enjoy them all, but I know that if I do rock, more people are going to listen to it than a piano, instrumental, orchestral piece of music, soundtrack kind of music. But it doesn't mean that you don't do both as an artist, So it's hard to really cater to people's feelings. What I love is that, and I know that I can speak for the rest of the guys in the band, that no matter what's going on with our creative difference or the band not making new music or not touring fully or whatever, everyone's incredibly appreciative of what we have, in terms of the love that we get from our fans and the way that people react to our music, and the way that it's, we get all these emails about how it's changed people's lives and all of that stuff. And that is like mind-blowing, it's like the biggest honor, And when I meet people on the street, I'm still incredibly honored that someone would pick me out and look at me in a positive light, not knowing who I am personally, but knowing me through my music, through our music, let's say. And I think that's a great fucking honor, I feel blessed for it, but it doesn't mean that thing should continue forever either,
Have your bandmates read the book?
We've sent it to them like a month ago, so I don't know. I know my brother-in-law hasn't gotten it. And he's like, why haven't you? I'm like, we sent it to the office. Why haven't you gone? I'm gonna have to take it to him Saturday. But he's a funny guy. My brother-in-law is my drummer, right? John Dolmayan. Yeah. And he's a funny guy because he said something like, "Listen, if you're not bashing everyone, I'm not gonna bother to read it."
Yeah. Spoken like someone who's been in a van for a really long time. Two questions before we go, and I'm cautious of your time and grateful for the time. First question is, you said at the beginning something that I caught. You said, this was a book of philosophy and lessons, and I thought you were going to say that I feel like I can impart to the world, but what you said was that I can learn myself through the writing of this book. Can you give me an example of something you learned philosophically through the writing of this book that maybe you didn't know before?
part of it is my family history, the deep dive and research into the family history about my parents and how they met, which I didn't know the first day that they met, like the fact that the book gave me the opportunity to go back and learn things I didn't know about their life and about my grandparents and stuff like that. That to me alone was worth the effort, in knowing, because that also helps figure out who you are, but I think I really, really realized a lot of the mistakes I had made within the band, specifically writing the book. Yeah. I mean, I knew that my spirituality had created had misunderstandingly created passivity within me, having to do with the band at a time where I needed to be proactive. But I just wasn't, for whatever reason, whatever I was going through at the time. I was going through a breakup with my ex, all that. But I was in it. So I'm very careful in the book that no matter what our creative differences are with the guys in the band, I take responsibility for my own part as well. Because when we came back in 2011 to start touring after our hiatus, I was a different person. I was more proactive. I was more confident. I had put out solo record that had done well and all of this stuff, kind of proving to myself that, listen, I do write these songs and people do want to listen to them. And I'm enjoying this process, touring for it, all of that stuff. I came back in as a different person than I had left. But I hadn't really owned up to my own passivity and kind of letting the reins go of the band in 2003, 2004. Writing the book really, really put me in touch with that more than anything else.
Last question before you go. Reading the unbelievable hardship that your grandfather went through in the first quarter of this book, reading about your family's history in the Armenian Genocide, I had this moment where I thought, even for you to have been raised in a safe house with heat and light is a victory for him.
Right.
What would he have thought of how your life actually did turn out?
So I'm privileged that he was still alive. He lived to be like 97, and I'm privileged that he was still alive to kind of understand the impact that our music was making on our community more than anything else. I mean, I'm not sure he's ever heard our music or anything like that, but because, Armenian papers wrote about the band, and so he knew that the band became something important for our community, and he was proud of that, so to me, that was like the greatest thing, to be able to give back to his legacy and what he had lived through, to be able to speak up for those who weren't able to speak up for themselves.
Serj, I loved reading the book. I love any chance I get to talk to you. Thanks so much for making the time.
Likewise, Tom. I love that interview. I had fun, man. Thank you.
I had a great time too. We got to do one of these in person one of these days, whenever you get out of California or New Zealand or something like that. Power Serj is happening, buddy. I hope you like the bouzouki, because that's what I'm playing these days.
I love the bouzouki.